Red Hat Software is an American multinational software company and provides open source products to enterprises. Founded in 1993, today the company has more than $3 billion in revenue and recently became a subsidiary of this super huge technology company, IBM. For a company that prides itself on community-powered approach to providing enterprise technology, Red Hat found its content team isolated and siloed. Laura Hamlyn, director of the company's global content team within corporate marketing, set out to change exactly that and establish a coherent voice for the brand. She had to make that tiny team matter to the business. Barely 7 years later, Laura won title of 2019 B2B Content Marketer of the Year. Laura is now the Senior Director of the Global Content Team at Red Hat, focused on content creation, curation, UX, content strategy, brand affinity, story development, and governance. We ensure Red Hat has an authentic voice in the technology industry, says Laura. Laura truly is the embodiment of what it means to be a marketing maker. Of course, this is our interview segment where we bring in a wonderful practitioner to talk about all of those things. And I could not be debuting the show with someone more important, more lovely, and more wonderful in the world than Laura Hamlyn. Laura, welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you. That's a really great introduction. I really appreciate it.
Well, you and I have known each other for a number of years. And I've just watched, it's amazing. I often tell the story about how you and I, when we first started working together, like 8 years ago, and you were a team of 6 at Red Hat, and have now grown to, I think it's now 45 or 50 people that you have now in content at Red Hat. And it's just been this amazing story. Tell me how, I think one of the most remarkable things that you've been able to do there is truly sort of embody the spirit of reach and frequency, the classic marketing idea of reaching audiences and, impacting them with content. And tell me, was that an idea that they had prior to your arrival, or is that something that you started to build into the process as you came into the job, or how practically did that really start to get its legs at Red Hat?
When I joined Red Hat, they already had a magazine. And the magazine became a website. So there was already this theory that if you put good content out in the world, they will come. I mean, I know you talk a lot about John Deere and what is it, the furrow? The furrow?
Yeah.
So, it's not a new idea. I mean, it's this old marketing. But, they already had that in their brain. The challenge is, we were also kind of an up and comer trying to bust into the cloud world. So if anybody out there has worked in software, cloud was, it was just the thing you had to sort of, everybody had to talk about, everybody had to have a position on. And so it was interesting because there was this dynamic of like, no, we serve these technical people who are in the trenches and they're building the software, and we give them good content, whether it's, of course, we have a terrific docs team, but beyond that, really put stuff out there to help them figure out how to use this stuff and how to navigate, the IT world. Then there's the other side of it, which a lot of people in marketing run into, which is these product marketers who are out there also trying to sound, they're all trying to sound like they know exactly what's going to happen in IT, and nobody does. This is a wild, wild world. IT is wild, and it changes all the time, which I love. And I think that's something that, our CEO, Paul Cormier, he's our new CEO, fairly new. He's got that voice. If you watch him do interviews, he's very plain spoken. And, I remember years ago, our head of PR said something like, people wanted Paul to come in and tell them what was really going on, because there's a lot of obfuscation when it comes to IT. There's people are just trying to be like, this is where it's headed, and nobody really knows, So I like that dynamic at Red Hat of like having this leader, because Paul was our head of products and technologies before that, who sort of does tell it like it is. He's a Boston guy. He's very plain spoken, and so to me that was kind of like when I came in, I was like, well, on the one hand, I hear a lot of product marketers trying to talk the talk. Everybody's using the terms and even just trying to sell new concepts. Like when you think about SEO and people coming up with, I mean, in IT, we come up with new words all the time and new terms and, PaaS and infrastructure as a service and all these things. We're trying to explain these very complex ideas. And sometimes it just doesn't work. I mean, so for me, it was, when I came in, I did see, you had a magazine, it became a website. I see that you got an idea of how we could do this, but I know when I first started, we were a very reactive team. I mean, we were just kind of taking what people threw at us and trying to make sure it was in the right template. And, let's start there. And maybe in the right, CMS or DAM, like stored in the right place. And then, that's how we started.
It's funny because I often tell the story about how, you've gotten started through this idea of mechanizing content, right? Getting it into the right DAM, getting it into the right, process and template and all of that. And I think that evolution that you made is even more interesting, which is, just to your point, you're talking about things like, speaking in plain terms and letting people really know what's going on and educating the market and sort of teaching customers how to be customers and teaching, all of these wonderful things. Tell me, as you made that evolution, was it, we get lost sometimes in this idea of brand journalism and we need to cover the facts and we need to do this and we need to do that. And it sounds like, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of the things that you did was you said, no, we had our CEO, our head of technology, we have a point of view on the world. We have a point of view on how technology and IT should be managed. Thus, we can sort of surface that. And it's not just educating to facts, but it's actually bringing our Red Hat point of view to the world to tell that story, to teach those customers how to be our customers. Am I getting that right?
I think so. And again, I want to emphasize, I work for a company that has a very strong point of view. We're an open source company. So I feel lucky there. Anybody who's in marketing knows, it's a struggle to make people care about what you're doing and why, and what is your point of view, and why does it really matter? Does it really matter? So, and we're, at Red Hat, we're a bunch of skeptical people. So, we have gotten feedback that our mission matters in the industry, that when it comes to certain topics, people look to Red Hat to say, what do you guys think, And I think, you talk about brands embodying a person. So like when I was in grad school, we would say, all right, this brand, who is this brand? Like name a person. Like, is it Oprah Winfrey? Or who's the voice of this brand? So, we did that with Red Hat at one point. We had some Neil deGrasse Tyson, we think about him and how he talks about the universe, but he brings it down to something you can understand, trying to find people who aren't necessarily like, polarizing figures, but also people who have a point of view. So it's an interesting dynamic. But yeah, it is true. Like you definitely have to connect your voice to what people want to hear. That's the whole dynamic of marketing. And what is your voice? And do people even care that that's your voice? We celebrate companies that have marketing that really speaks to who they are, and so I think I came in with an advantage working for Red Hat because of that, because we do have a mission.
Yeah. Well, tell me a little bit about, so as you evolved this idea and started scaling, right? So there's this sort of idea of, okay, we're going to, first of all, this is going to work, right? It's one of those things where, yeah, it started to work. We started reaching more audiences. We started becoming more popular within the business. People started demanding more content from us. We start building in all of these wonderful points of view, and now there's pressure, right? Now there's pressure to say, hey, we need to get into podcasting and we need to have a blog and we need to have white papers and we need to have presentations and we need to have all of these different content things fulfilled. How did you practically start to think about, other than just being able to hire more people, which I happen to know that you weren't able to do right away.
Right.
How did you start practically being able to address the need for scale to reach more audiences through different channels, and at the same time maintain the quality of that point of view that you had taken so much care to develop?
Yeah. Yeah. It's different content types. And, I have 4 divisions of the team. So I have a team that, edits and they do editing, but they also do keynotes and they do, messaging. So there's one group that does that. There's one group that works on content strategy for the web. There's one group that works on localization and some measurement strategy. And then there's the copywriting group, advertising group that writes, ads and also works on podcasts and things. So I do have a team set up, and you helped me figure that out and navigate that early on. Like, how do I set up a team? And I definitely would say that headcount isn't the solution. Like, you don't just be like, give me more people and I'll do this thing. That's not the way, I think, I honestly I still love the model of like, working with a team and them saying, let me put one head count on your team now, because I believe that you can do this, just one person, maybe it's a contractor. We start small, what I mean by that is I build a relationship with somebody using the team that I have. So the team that I have, terrific team, they go in, they start doing work on the side if they can, like they just work the work in. The team really loves them. They usually, love the work they do and go, okay, if I can get a contractor in that is supported by your team, like on your team, then we'll scale. So the scale for me is start small, prove a proof of concept. Those little, we call them pilots or proof of concept. Like, do a little thing, see if you can prove the model, and then get buy-in, and then grow. And we do look for executive sponsorship. I mean, we've got a couple of executives at Red Hat who have been benevolent, caretakers of my team. So they come in and they'll say, oh, you did a great job on this podcast. Let's do another one. Or I see you did that. Let me see if I can get some money for this, And we also try to build an organic play with everything we do, so that you don't rely on budget. You don't rely on big budget or, a lot of promotion. You try to let the audience, because when you build that organic side of the house, you can let the audience tell you what they want. They're whether it's from a web perspective and they're coming in, because they found your content. We've just done a brand study, a second brand affinity, brand lift study with our podcast, and found that most people are finding it. I mean, they're finding it. So it's being shared, or they're finding it from we're advertising on other podcasts, or, they're hearing about it from other podcasts. So, trying to make sure that your program from the start has some sort of organic play to scale, so that you don't have to have budget or headcount all the time to do the thing.
Yeah. Did you end up scaling and starting from saying, okay, here's an audience we want to attract in, and here are the channels that we want to use to do that? Or did you rather go from sort of the inside out, looking at, okay, well, here are the products that we have, and here's the audiences for them, and we need to scale that way? Was there one particular way that you found was more effective in sort of reaching more audiences?
That's a very interesting point, because one of the struggles that we've had at Red Hat is we weren't really in the C-suite, so like, just abysmal, awareness. And so that's hard for a product marketer to think about. Like, they understand the technical audience. You've got the sysadmins, you've got the developers, you've got those audiences that are, architects. They're more technical, and they're like, yeah, we got those, but we need these, we need the C-suite. And so we had that dynamic for years at Red Hat, where we were just like, oh, how do we do both? Because we're really good with that technical audience. So I think the technical audience just was always with us. They're always like, we like Red Hat and we like your content. And we were just good at that. And it's almost like you take your eye off the ball of what you're good at, and you go and you're like, wait, we need these big thought leadership work. So over the years, I'd say we started with product. We started thinking like, okay, Red Hat Enterprise Linux was the reason behind, Command Line Heroes, because we were launching Red Hat Enterprise Linux 8, and we wanted to do something different. So the product marketing team said, we've got to do something different. So that was the kernel of the idea. We just, this is a big deal. We need to do something different. And their idea was to maybe do some videos, or, they started there like, well, let me just do some videos about the operating system, and does the operating system matter, and just asking these questions. And that led to research, which led to the podcast. It was, over time. So I think just, we were really product focused. We always have been. And in order, as a marketer, again, if you're thinking about how do we make this stuff? How do you do it? You got to get the product marketers to buy in. So you got to be all about that product sometimes, and like really just say like, let's figure it out. Let's really think about what that product can do, and let's sell that product. But then as a marketer, you sort of go out concentric circles and go, okay, I see what the product can do. I see that idea. Let's build out on that and figure out something different. That once we get the buy-in from the product marketing team, maybe there's budget there. Yeah. And then we can figure out if we can build something that's what happened with Command Line Heroes. It just got bigger over time. It started as an operating system podcast.
It's funny because, I think the idea here is that what I'm hearing you say is that it's independent of where the original idea for, whether it's a platform, whether it's a campaign, whether it's a one-off video, wherever the idea comes from, it has to integrate into the classic marketing mix, right? It has to integrate into your product mix. It has to integrate with where you're going, with your audiences and with your customers. And that integration piece is such an important component of what it is you're doing. Once you've got it up and running, however, tell me a little bit about, so Command Line Heroes, which for those of you in the audience who don't know, is an amazing, wonderful podcast that Laura's referring to, that is all about Red Hat, and Linux. And it's a, award-winning, great podcast. Do you look at that podcast now a bit like its own product? Do you have, sort of its own caretakers and own sort of idea of how it's managed as its own little platform? Or how does the team see sort of the Command Line Heroes these days?
Well, one thing that I love about the podcast is the name, because, it kind of says what it is, and it makes it's a big idea. Like it's, these Command Line Heroes, these people who are on the command line changing the world in some ways. And so that sounds cheesy to me all of a sudden, but but you know what I mean? Cause we do keep it real. Yeah. We keep it real though, because, we did venture into some really big heroes this year. We actually had like our branding included like action, figures and stuff. We didn't actually make them, but one day maybe. But we actually had these people who, one of the themes was people who were behind the technology that you maybe used and had no idea that this amazing person was behind it. But the podcast is actually lightly branded. So we didn't do advertising on the podcast, although we thought about it. We had like our storage product team were saying, hey, can we run ads on Command Line Heroes? And we really thought about it. But we work with a vendor, with a podcast company who, they gave us really good direction on maybe, sticking with a kind of a non-branded podcast. And we have found that people actually know it's most of our listeners know it's from Red Hat. And so, for the podcast itself, we knew that we would get a technical audience. We knew that the audience for, because we started out with like the OS wars, it was like a Star Wars feel. And it was just, that's a really dramatic story about, Apple and all the different OSs and how they sort of fought the battle and where open source kind of came in and eventually won in many ways for an enterprise companies. So we felt like we had a kind of a cool dramatic story. And we also employ a bunch of giant nerds. Like our teams, the people that work at Red Hat are just, they love this stuff and they kind of geek out on it. So they are very intriguing people because they really bring it to life. So I think it was for us, the podcast definitely is and started about, with an idea of talking about the operating system, but the way that we told the story, because we work with I'll name Pacific Content, are the folks we work with to make the podcast. They've got showrunners, they've got production folks. They gave us all these, basically all the insights we could have on how to make a podcast and make it work. So, anyway, I think it started as a kernel of an idea to target technical people and talk about an OS, and it has grown into, just something, so much bigger. We actually are looking at the audience now and seeing some, executive, not a lot, but just a little bit. It's sort of, my theory is that people work through the ranks, like they start in a technical role and they get into a manager role and they kind of work up, but they remember the days. And I know you're like this. You have a sort of an IT marketing background. You remember those days and some of those stories you geek out to. because
You know,
it's so relevant.
I think that's an incredibly important point, which is, and even bringing it back to this idea of reach and frequency, that,
Yeah.
Consistency and time with an audience builds in sort of loyalty, right? Which is,
Yeah.
In many ways, some of the things that, but we've seen this happen at Content Marketing Institute, which is in the early days, the hallways were filled with interns and junior assistants and marketing managers and marketing directors. And over the past 10 years, I've just watched all of those people rise through their own ranks, where now we have many more senior level of executives in our audience, not because we're attracting more senior level executives, but because those people grew up with us.
Right. Exactly.
It's an incredible thing. And it speaks to how this is really a long game, right? This is, a long-term investment. One of the questions I often get is, how do we reach C-suites? How do we get them involved as an audience? And one of my answers is, target them when they're not in the C-suite, right? Because eventually they will be, and you can get them, but you've got to have the long game in mind. Well, and on that note, maybe talk a little bit about how you're starting to measure what you're doing. And certainly, we talk a lot in content marketing about lead gen and MQLs and SQLs and all that stuff, but talk a little bit about some of the things that you're doing, which I know you're passionate about, sort of the brand and some of those ideas, reaching audiences that really affect the brand, as we talked about in the early part of the interview, and how you're actually quantifying some of that.
Yeah. So one of the things we're really, I talked to the team, I think it was early last year, maybe the year before, and said, imagine, so Command Line here is super popular, which immediately I go, what if it doesn't, what if people ask it, like try to take the budget away from us? Everybody, because it bothered me that people were like, oh, I just love it. It's just great. And I'm like, but why and how, And I mean, even, our CEO is wearing the Command Line here as sweatshirt and meetings and stuff. And I'm like, okay, they love it, but like, how can we give them talking points about why it matters? Like why it's a great show. Okay. So they love the stories. And honestly, that's the hardest part. So we've done that and we're doing that. So that's the hard part, is getting terrific stories out there. But how do we measure it? And so that's one of the things that our team is really super focused on now, is what do we as Red Hat look at when we think about brand awareness? How do we create brand awareness, and how do we create brand affinity? And how do we define brand affinity? And to be honest with you, that is an ongoing conversation right now. So we don't have all the answers. And we never will, but we actually literally are saying to ourselves, what does brand affinity look like for Red Hat? And how can we create more programming that generates brand affinity? So we're working with a third-party team that works really only on podcasts, and they're doing surveys of our audience. So they've done surveys now for 2 years. And I've, got my little list of factoids, but 99% of listeners knew, and it was a third-party company that surveyed them, knew that Red Hat was the sponsor of the show, which to us, and especially to Pacific Content that we work with, they were super excited about that because it's lightly branded. So people are so nervous about lightly branded podcasts. So they're kind of looking to us to say, no, they know it's Red Hat. And then it says, so our research also says that Red Hat, they gave Red Hat an average brand favorability rating of 8.1 out of 10 compared to 6.3 among non-listeners. And 6 in 10 reported taking a positive action with Red Hat since they started listening. And we've got a list of like what positive actions look like. And then most of them found Command Line Heroes by searching for a technology podcast, which is because the reason behind that, I think, is because we actually identified podcasts as a place where there weren't that many folks. It was a good watering hole for us. So that's kind of pays that off, that back in the day we said, there's room for this. And there is, because people are actually searching for it. I think it's becoming, there's more and more podcasts every day. So we know that, but we sort of got in on a place where people were actually looking for this content. And then 8 and 10 said they had shared Command Line Heroes with others. 85% of engaged listeners said they love the podcast, up from 64% last year. And we have a love-like score increase from 95 to 99%. with folks saying they like or love the podcast. And the feedback that we got verbatim say we want more content. So that regular, I know you talk a lot about regular publishing, that matters. You've got to continue to put out your product. A lot of people want to launch a blog or something and they don't have an editorial plan. They don't have the long game plan. And so, you know, believe me, when we said we were on season 8, I was like, are you kidding me? We have, people still want to listen to this, but they do, you know, and they ask for more technical content. So that was interesting too. Like they're interested in those technical stories. We kept it kind of middle to more technical, but still, you know, they want more technical content. And they just want more. They just want more stuff, more content from us. So we actually are putting out another podcast that's going to be more product focused, and it's going to be more regular or more often, I would say, not more regular, more often, more frequent than Command Line Heroes. So that's just those are some of the things we're measuring. We also are measuring what people think about Red Hat as compared to some quote competitors, because, you know, we're partners with, you know, everyone in software. So I wouldn't necessarily use the word competitors, but like, what do they think about Red Hat versus Microsoft or, you know, other people in the industry? And their opinion of Red Hat goes up. And their opinion of our competitors sometimes goes down, which has nothing to do with the editorial. It's just maybe they don't have a podcast that that people like as much. I don't know where that comes from, but that's a weird fact that is not something we're gunning for or targeting. But we are asking people what they think about Red Hat, you know, if they think positively about Red Hat after listening to the podcast.
I love all of that. I mean, you know, because what it speaks to is that you're measuring impact, right? You're measuring the impact that the content has. You know, what I didn't hear you say, which I was very refreshed to not hear you say, are downloads, right? Which I'm sure you're measuring, and I'm sure you're watching, and I'm sure you and your team care about immensely, which is certainly, you know, a measure of reach, right? However, you know, if we can increase the number of downloads or listens, we're certainly reaching more people. However, what was important for the brand measurement wasn't the number of downloads or the number of listens. It's the impact that you're creating through, you know, is it creating a more brand affinity worthy customer? Are we helping to drive education? Are we helping to drive, you know, awareness of what it is we do to a new audience or to an existing audience? And is it helping us develop even better content, right? Whether it should be more technical or whether we should launch a new podcast. I think those measurement techniques are, you know, it's one of those things where I so often will talk to folks who are measuring content marketing, and I'll say, you've got to get your eyes out of Google Analytics. You know, you've got to get you've got to get into asking, working, and talking to the audience, because they'll tell you what's working and what's not just watching their behavior on a website.
Yeah. And, you know, one of the things we're doing, I mean, our web team is doing this too. You know, we definitely look at downloads and page views, of course. I mean, it's one metric, but we don't talk about that. With Command Line Heroes, we're looking at how long people are, like, is it 80%, 90% of the podcast, especially without commercials, you know, there's no break. So we really want like 85%. We want people way deep into the podcast. We want to listen to the whole thing, and they do. And I didn't report on that with this, because this is kind of more about the brand and not, but that's what we look at metrics every day. Like, those are the metrics we look at, as time spent. Because, you know, imagine somebody spending 20 minutes with your brand every week. I mean, that's unbelievable. And, you know, so that's kind of what we're looking for from the podcast. And then from web traffic, we really do look at, do people go from, you know, we have different levels of, you know, like, we have topic pages that are kind of broader, like, what is this thing? And then we have article pages, which are, how do you do this with that thing? Or how do you know, what about security in that thing, or storage in that thing? And so we look for people to dive deeper into the topic, or go laterally from topic to topic, because they're like, wow, you guys are covering a lot of things. So we kind of look for people, you know, to kind of move around from topic to topic or topic to article. Certainly CTAs, we want people to sign up for our newsletter. You know, we want people to, webinars we found are really big, you know, of course, right now, you know, COVID times. Absolutely, online events are big, and we understand there's fatigue there. But over time, we've noticed webinars and virtual events were a big conversion point for us from a content marketing perspective on our website. Outside of the fact that we want them to eventually get the product page and download a white paper, which people come into 700 doors in your website. Your website's basically got, is porous. And so, a lot of people just go straight to product because they just need to know about that product. And so, our data analysts have even said, like, let's build an upside down, whatever you want to call it, funnel, where it's like product first and then build up and go, you like this thing? What about this thing? Did you know this topic? We kind of go up from the product.
Yeah, that's an amazing way to look at it. Well, in the final moments of this, what practical, so for those that are watching this show and saying, okay, I'm just starting, I'm just a beginner at this. And what practical advice would you give to perhaps yourself, 5 years ago, 8 years ago, for those who are just beginning to make the business case for this and just starting to dive into this? What's the one practical thing that you would advise someone to do if they want to get to where you are today?
Well, I feel like we built this on, the idea of partnership, like finding a partner. Marketing shouldn't be an adversary to, other things. Marketing should be a partner. So I think solving a problem in a small way with marketing, is where we started. So looking at our whole web team started because we had a competitive situation where we needed to be known for a thing. And so we started building content on that and just that one thing, that one topic, and started watching that traffic. And now that's basically how we have our whole content strategy for the website, So really thinking about something that's kind of meaty, that's a challenge, and jumping in and trying to figure out, like, how can I partner with this other person at the company and build alliances so that you're not working in a vacuum. You're not just thinking about marketing. You're thinking about a bigger picture, a business challenge, the audience, really. My team would say, we know that the whole adage of the customer is always right, but what we really mean by that is, what do they want to see? Like, it's probably not what you think. And so maybe even couple your partnership and your starting small with research. Like, just think about somehow or another including research. And we did research at events. We were already going to events, and maybe one day we will again. So let's just do research there. Like, let's just set up a little booth. Let's give away some things and ask people questions and interview them. So, try to build things into the way that you naturally work. Even use your internal audience as your audience. You have people maybe with titles that your audience has that maybe you could use. So I don't know if that sounds trite, but we start small, create partnerships, solve a problem together. And that way they'll always remember you, like, oh yeah, you're that person that helped me solve that problem. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it as a piece of advice. Laura, thank you so much for all of the wonderful advice. And I love your story so much. And thanks for being on the show today.
Well, thank you. I'm so excited about the show. I cannot wait to listen to it. So I need all the help I can get. So yeah, keep making episodes. I'm into it. I will be a subscriber.
Awesome.
Thank you.